My name is Judith Allen. I am a PhD in art history. I'm pretty qualified to talk about just about every kind of art, although I might be a little less familiar with non-Western art. It's Paul Cézanne. It's one of his still lifes. He's from the late 19th century. That painting could be anywhere, to be honest with you. I have no idea where it is. But if it isn't in a museum, for heaven's sakes, if you see it at a yard sale, make sure you buy it. The one next to it is probably worth even more because it's by Van Gogh. And Van Gogh is a popular artist. His base was sunflowers. And this one's interesting because it was painted while he was trying to open an art school with Paul Gauguin. He was having trouble. They didn't like each other. They were like oil and water. When he painted this, he painted a lot of the sunflowers after they had gone by because of his emotions at the time. The painting next to it, of course, is Starry Night. But the fun story about Starry Night is that Van Gogh had to have whatever he was painting right in front of him. He couldn't look at nature and then go home and paint it. And to paint this scene at night, he was standing out in a field and he had candles stuck in his straw hat. And the people in the village saw him out there and they thought he was crazy, which he probably was. But the painting, again, is a great painting of his emotions. And the cypress tree in the foreground, the wind is going through it and it's moving. And of course, the stars, they're alive, they're moving. It's how he saw nature. And then you can contrast that with the village down below, which is quite static and not very interesting compared to nature. And that would be Vincent's interpretation. By the way, he didn't kill himself. More scholarship has shown that the bullet that did eventually kill him was shot by a couple of kids that he played with who were trying to be cowboys. And one of them accidentally shot off a gun and the bullet hit him in the stomach. And he didn't tell the police who came because he didn't want to get the teenagers in trouble. He said he shot himself by accident.
Well, I got a theory. I think Blathers shot him.
Well, I can tell you every one of his paintings skyrocketed in value after he died. He sold one painting in his entire life. He would trade his paintings for rent. That's George Seurat, Sunday on Grand Chat Island. And it's pointillist, so if you could zoom in on it, you would see the whole thing is made of little tiny dots. And the idea was that colors were richer if you blended them in your eye than if you blended them in the paint and painted them. The colors divided into their components are much brighter. This is an island where Parisians went to spend the weekend. There is, of course, famously a monkey being shepherded on a leash by the lady on the right. This is in the Chicago Museum. Yeah, that one's a little odd. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. By a German painter, Bollmer, maybe? It's about, there's a figure all dressed in white, standing up in the boat, going to the afterlife, maybe a soul. It just doesn't belong in with all these other French paintings. But it is 19th century. On the right is a very famous Manet painting. That's Bar at the Folies Bergère. The Folies was a place where you could go and eat out with your friends and, of course, get drunk. In the right-hand corner, there are a couple of legs. Those are the legs of an acrobat who is flying above the heads of the patrons because it was a circus. But the woman who's the bartender here has glass that is on her right, and we're looking at her from the front. And on the right, we're seeing her from the rear reflected in this glass. This is her customer. We're actually in the space here of this customer. That could be Manet, but they've already discounted that that's Manet. The little boy with the pipe is a Manet. I'm not sure what museum it's in. It's famous because it's painted on a flat background. Manet is saying something about the act of painting and whether painting has to be three-dimensional or whether it can just be merely suggested with the outline of his dark jacket against the white background. So although there's no shading, there's no chiaroscuro giving you dimension, it's implied by the silhouette around the figure. Part of it is the influence of Japanese woodcuts, and part of it is also Manet's obsession with Spanish painting. And of course, there's a lot of attention given to somebody who is nobody. You know, why the heck is he painting this kid, and why isn't he painting somebody famous? It's pre-Raphaelite. This is, oh yeah, Malay. They're called pre-Raphaelite because they were going back to subjects before Raphael, Hamlet, Shakespeare, and it's supposed to represent the scene in Hamlet where Ophelia goes crazy and she's seen floating away in the river singing. So this is the scene where she kills herself by drowning in the river, and it's meant to be very romantic. That would be in London somewhere, I think. And the one on the right is another Millet, but the name is spelled Millet, and it's called the Gleaners. It represents people who are coming after the harvest and are picking up whatever the harvesters left behind to feed their family. And in the background, you can see the huge harvest. It's up on top of the wagon and getting what they can from the harvest so that they don't starve. And that's a switch over to painting common subject matter and a sympathy for the peasant, putting them in the foreground. He's made them look noble. And the one on the right is called the Sower. I think that's a Millet. And this is the guy who's sowing the crops that will be harvested by the landowner later. He's a hard-working soul, so he's a common man. But then there's also the biblical background, parables in the New Testament of the sowing of the crops. And you can see that in the background there's the detail of the birds. So only some of the seed will sprout. Some of it will get eaten by birds, and some of it will end up on rock and won't grow at all. So it's a little bit about the human soul. Our lives are fated, and not all the seed is equal. There are a lot of takeoffs of this painting by Van Gogh. Van Gogh wanted to be a missionary and go and live with the poor. His embracing of Christ-like behavior, where he slept on straw in a hut and ate the same thing that the peasants did, disturbed the peasants. They thought he was nuts. They expected a minister to live in a mansion, that he was never accepted by the peasants. Okay, well, that's Aztec. That's pre-Columbian. I think it's the head of Chocmol. What is that doing in your museum? That absolutely was stolen from an a grave robbing. It's non-Western, it's from South America, so this is a weird place to put it. I think it's called The Death of the Tamaran. Okay, and that's Turner. That's William Turner. That landscape, that seascape, is about the death of the old world and the re-emergence of the new mechanical world. That fire-breathing, smoke-belching monstrosity is towing out into the harbor the old world. The beautiful sailing ships that were part of the 19th century, they're literally being towed out to sea to be scuttled. The sun is going down because the sun is going down on that old, beautiful seafaring world. This is Eugene Delacroix and his Liberty Leading the People. The figure in the center is a personification of liberty, and that is why she's holding the French flag. She's encouraging the rabble behind her to rebel against the French king and take back their country. They're just a rabble of different parts of French society. The little boy with the two pistols, the gentleman with the top hat next to the guy who's from some other country, maybe Jamaica. You can hear the French music in the background. Da 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 da. It's pretty grisly. The dead bodies in the foreground are right where your eyes would be. It's a very large painting. The figures are larger than life. Actually, Delacroix would have studied dead bodies. He would have been at the morgue to make them as grotesque as possible. And that figure of Liberty is the Statue of Liberty that the French sent to us as a gift. Oh, that's Goya. The name is La Maja. This would have hung in a gentleman's lounge where his fellow cigar smokers after dinner would be standing around looking at it. But there is another version of this that would have been underneath it that is the same woman without any clothes on that the gentleman would be allowed to see and admire. I would think this would be in Spain. The Prada. Oh, that's Blue Boy. Is it Gainsborough? Commission portrait of somebody's son, somebody rich, and it would have hung in their home. Everything in the painting means something. The flowers down in the right corner, this would be their estate, and he's very proud of the property that he owns. It's a Velázquez painting. It's named after the little princess in the foreground. Oh, Las Meninas. I'm going to say it's in the Prado in Spain. It's a funny painting because the guy who painted it is the guy on the left shown painting it. So that's his self-portrait painting this painting. So we're actually looking at the painting that he's in the process of painting. What we see in the mirror in the background are the King and Queen of Spain who have come to visit their daughter who's being painted. We're standing in their space, but the women on either side of him are her maids of honor who are in there to entertain her. And in the foreground on the right is a little person who would have been thought suitable as a playmate for the princess. The dog and the little person, not very sensitive. And then in the background is a door opening that shows one of the major figures who's coming to tell them something's going on that they should know about. And then, of course, in the background is a nun who also would have been considered suitable as a companion of the princess. The Spanish love of having their children hang out with dwarves was kind of a problem when we get to Versailles, where Marie Antoinette is a Spanish princess and she brings her dwarves with her to the French court. They did not see how dwarves could be considered pets. They frowned on her almost immediately from the beginning. And then, of course, the one on the right is called The Milkmaid, and it's by Vermeer. The one on the right is a really good example of how Vermeer cheated when he used a separate room to get a mirror image of what he was painting, and it was projected onto his canvas. And basically, he just traced it. He traced around the image. He used photographic projection to get all that detail that you see there. The girl with the pearl is also a servant. We don't know anything about her. She would not have been able to afford to wear that kind of jewelry. These are both very famous Vermeer paintings, and they're famous for their detail. They have an astonishing amount of detail lavished on something as simple as a servant woman doing her daily chores and a servant girl caught in a moment. Got a Rembrandt. That's the Night Guard. I'm going to say it's in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Well, Rembrandt wasn't appreciated for what he did well, so he had to make a living somehow, and this painting is a result of his trying to make a living. It was commissioned by a society. They were known as the Night Watch, and they never actually did anything military. But they commissioned Rembrandt to paint this portrait of them as a group, and they were unhappy when he finished the painting because they had all paid the same amount to be included in the painting. You couldn't see all of them, like this guy on the right, only showing you part of his face. I think he did a fabulous job of taking something really boring and making it exciting. That angel-looking character on the left is made up. Got really criticized for painting somebody in the painting who never paid. Settled the whole lawsuit by having how much of each person was actually seen in the painting and cutting down the amount of money they paid to be shown. Yeah, this one is outside of my area of expertise. That is Hawaiian, maybe? It's a former king of Hawaii. It's a king wanting to be seen like a Roman emperor. Why would you want it in your museum? It's not a very good sculpture.
Given by the state of Hawaii in the 60s.
Right, that even they didn't want it. That is The Birth of Venus by Botticelli. It's Italian Renaissance. And I'm sure it's in a museum in Italy. A Florentine museum. It's inspired by the uncovering of Greek and Roman statuary. She's been born from the ocean and is being blown into the land by zephyrs. The spirit of spring is coming out to clothe her nudity. A couple of very famous Da Vinci paintings. Okay, that's a woman with an ermine. She's a commission portrait. And I think we do know what her name is. And there's supposed to be a comment on her personality with the weasel. She's supposed to be alert and lithe and as noble as her pet and as unapproachable as her pet. That's Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. I don't know where it is. It could be in the Vatican Museum. It's from his notebooks. It's supposed to be a representation of the symmetry of man, and he wrote backwards. So supposedly you'd need a mirror to read what he wrote. Very pricey wall here. All priceless works. Mr. Owl is a thief. You stole them. They couldn't possibly be in your museum. It's the Mona Lisa, and it's in the Louvre. It's a painting that he never finished. He was commissioned to paint Mona Lisa, and he never gave it up. He kept it. So there's all kinds of conspiracy theories around why he wouldn't surrender it. It was in his possession when he died, and he was living in France at the time, and that's how it ended up in the Louvre. It has two separate unresolved landscapes behind it. They're different colors, and they don't go together very well. It's a road that disappears into a lake. It is the Mona Lisa. That's a painting by Bruegel. Same time period as the Mona Lisa, but in the north. I think it's just called Winter. It's a genre painting of everyday people doing everyday things. It has no high elevated theme. It's just like a snapshot of winter in the north with skaters on the lake and hunters coming home from their hunt. That's a weird thing to have in your museum. It's done by an Italian who is famous for making faces out of pieces of vegetables and fruit. It's one of many paintings. Of all the stuff that you've shown me, this is the weirdest thing for you to have in your collection. It's just a footnote. Great collection. You've put together a fabulous collection, even though it's all stolen. You have a great collection. Enjoy your walk through the museum. I can't imagine the history of art without this work, except for the weird portrait made out of fruit and vegetables. I would give him a A+. He's grouped them well. They make sense. They go through time. They're in the right place and time. He's managed to have non-Western art as well as famous works of Western art. That's to his credit. Congratulate yourself. You've put together a fabulous collection.